Okay, you were in Cebu, and the Philippines is kind of an archipelago of a bunch of islands, right?
That's right. We were set up there in this old building that had been a laundry at one time, and it was a pretty good facility, except when there was a very heavy rain, the place flooded, and our transmitters were under about 2 feet of water, or at least half of the transmitters were covered with water. And later in the day, it subsided, and we set our transmitters up on boxes that maybe a foot or two high, and turned them all back on, and sure enough, every one of them worked. And that gave me a great deal of respect for the Australian electronic equipment because these were all Australian transmitters that we had at the time.
Now, were there any other, I don't know if you would describe this as a relay station or a transfer point for messages, were there any other operations like yours in the South Pacific?
Well, there probably were quite a few of them. We were Army level communications, and uh, we sent to the United States and to some European stations and to Australia. I don't really know all the exact points that we went to, but we had maybe 7 antenna systems aimed in different directions. We had occasionally had to change between transmitters and antennas.
Now, you mentioned that you stayed in a pup tent in one of the places you were at. Was that Cebu or was that
That was in the
New Guinea?
Hollandia, New Guinea. Yes.
Do you remember the guy that was in your pup tent, your partner?
Very much. Jimmy Manis. He was the one fellow that I met in basic training, and we spent our entire career together in the same company. And Jimmy died about 2 years ago on Christmas Day. But we've been in contact over the years ever since then. And we went to their 50th wedding anniversary, but he's the only person from our company that I remained in contact with.
And he was a transmitter guy too?
Yes.
Yeah. Uh, so from Cebu, you moved to Japan. You went into Japan after you learned about the
Well,
bomb being dropped.
we were on a ship, my understanding, that was going to engage in the attack on Japan with the Sixth Army. And we were off of the coast of Luzon when we had word of the atomic bomb being dropped. And as a result of that, the captain of the ship got orders to pick up another load of soldiers from someplace else, but they didn't bother to tell him what to do with the load he had. So he just ran us up on a beach. We were on vacation for about 3 months, eating and sleeping and swimming.
You got a good tan.
Yeah, we got a good time.
Where was it that you saw the snake that swallowed the pig? Was that?
Well, that was in New Guinea. We happened to be driving a Jeep, and we saw this big, I think it's a boa constrictor. He was in the road and obviously dead, had been run over, but he had a pig partway down his mouth.
Did you see many snakes while you were in New Guinea?
Actually, that's the only one I recall seeing.
Well, going back to Japan, was it a funny feeling, an unusual feeling, being in Japan, knowing what had happened?
Well, it certainly was, and one of the things that I remember was that I needed a haircut, and there was no barber on the company property, so I went to a Japanese barber, and he cut my hair and got out his long razor and trimmed my whiskers. And I thought to myself, I hope this guy knows that the war's over with. But he was very polite, and the reaction of the average Philippine person that I met was very positive. They were apparently glad that the war was over, but I felt no sense of resentment from any of them. I had Filipino workmen, 2 or 3 of them in the transmitter site that did basically manual labor, kept the place clean, and ran errands and stuff. It was surprising how well we communicated when neither one of us could understand a word of the other's language. But by hand methods and trying to demonstrate what I wanted, things got done.
You know, going back to your little program to help people over there with radios that didn't work, home radios.
Yeah, home radio.
Was that in Japan or was that
Well,
in the
that was
Philippines?
in the Philippines primarily, but I don't know how they found out about it. But they started bringing radios into me for repair, and there weren't very many parts that I had access to in the Army that were applicable to repair of little home receivers. So I sent home, and my wife contacted my former employer where I had worked servicing radios. Then they sent me over a bunch of condensers and resistors, and from those parts I continued to service the Philippine uh, peasant radios. And we did a little bit of that in Japan also, but not nearly as much.
Going back to your Autolite experience, and you mentioned the automatic pilots. That's automatic pilots for airplanes.
Well, as I said, the only part of it that we built was a framework that had some wiring in it, but none of the components that we worked with. The plant also produced separately from my department altogether, but they produced a lot of turn indicators, which are essentially small gyroscopes that went into airplanes. And I know they turned out thousands of those.
Do you know of any other war plants in Bay City during that time? Old Chevy, was that
Well, I think all of the major automobile companies had converted to war production of one kind or another.
and then we had Defoe's. Was Defoe's in?
Yes, Defoe's was turning out uh, ships, and they developed that rollover process for uh, speeding up the construction of ships
Right on the Saginaw River.
right on the Saginaw River. Yeah.
Wow. So looking back on it, you could feel a lot of pride and being part of an effort that.
Well, I think I told somebody earlier about my occasion of being interviewed for Air Cadet training, which would have been a 4-year college education, and I'd wound up being an officer on an airplane. But I went down to interview for it, and the guy looked me in the eye and said, "Why do you want to fly?" And I said, "Well, I don't particularly want to fly. I'd like to fix radios for you." Next man, no interest. And that was the end of my Air Force career. But looking back on it, he was right. I didn't have a sufficient interest for it. And furthermore, if I'd had an opportunity to pick my own job in the Army, I couldn't have picked a better one than they gave me. They made a mistake. They put me in a job of something I knew something about.
That's great.